Thank you very much indeed for your insight and expertise this morning. Very much appreciated. Well, I think you can agree that our guests have been stellar on this entire morning of breaking news in Iran. Spoken to Michael Gove, Dame Priti Patel, the Defence Secretary John Healey, and indeed others. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining me today. Lots more to come on GB News throughout the day. As you can imagine, we're going to be following every step of this. I'm going to be back at the same time next week. Up next on GB News is Angela Rippon, who is standing in for Michael Portillo. Do stay tuned. We're going to have breaking news, bringing it to you as it comes on TV and on your radio. But for now, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I will be back next week, 9:30.
Thank you, Camilla, for such an excellent programme this morning. Well, breaking news now. President Trump has confirmed the death of the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, describing him as one of the most evil people in history. In response, Iran has announced a 40-day period of mourning, whilst its neighbour Iraq is going to mourn for 3 days. Iranian state TV has also confirmed the death of Iran's army chief of staff. The country's top security official has said that the US and Israel seek to plunder and disintegrate Iran, with the country's parliament speaker calling leaders in the US and Israel filthy criminals. Ahmad Valdi, pictured on the left, has been named as the new commander-in-chief for Iran's Revolutionary Guard, and Ayatollah Afri has been appointed the temporary supreme leader. President Putin has pitched in and expressed his condolences over the death of the Ayatollah. That's as North Korea are calling the Israeli attacks and the US military operation against Iran as illegal aggression. Since striking began, Israel have dropped over 1,200 pieces of munitions in Iran over the past 24 hours. And one British expat has been wounded in Oman after the Dokkum port was targeted by the Iranian drones. We can also reveal an oil tanker has been attacked near the coast of Oman, and 20 people at the country's Maritime security centre, with 4 confirmed injured. Here are the very latest scenes we have at the US consulate in Pakistan, showing locals there protesting against the strikes on Iran. We can also confirm that explosions have been reported near Iran's broadcasting complex in Tehran. Multiple casualties have been confirmed after security forces opened fire on pro-Iranian protesters. Elsewhere, scenes of jubilation are filling the streets of Tehran after the end of the reign of the man who has ruled them with an iron fist for decades. Iran has unleashed a wave of missiles and drone attacks across the region, striking American allies and US military targets in Dubai, Doha, Myanmar and Kuwait City. The Israeli military say that the majority of aerial defence systems in western and central Iran have been dismantled, and they intend to harm Iran's land-to-land and land-to-air missiles. And this is Dubai last night, with reports that not only tourists have been struck, but not only tourist hotels have also been struck. But it's afternoon, and the busiest airport in the world has also been allegedly hit by Iran. Roughly 250,000 Brits live in Dubai, and thousands more will currently be there on holiday. US Central Command have released a series of images depicting their first 24 hours of Operation Fury. The US air defences have just intercepted a drone over a US military base near Erbil airport in Iraq, and businesses are going to be impacted as all vessels transits through the Strait of Hormuz have been suspended until further notice. Well, as you can tell, it is the one story that is dominating our coverage here on GB News today, and my colleagues here at GB News have been doing a brilliant job all morning. We are going in the next 2 hours, I hope, to take it one stage further. So joining me in the studio, I have 4 wonderful guests. We have the commissioning editor at The Spectator, spectator Lara Brown and former Labour candidate Kevin Craig. I'm also joined by US foreign policy analyst Dr. Jack Clayton and the defence editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. And our GB News reporter, Will Goody, will also be joining us in the studio, and I shall be joining him later for the very latest updates. But first, to my panel. And Jack Clayton, I want to start with you. Well, with all of you, in fact. I mean, it is all very well, I think, hearing President Trump say, rise up and force regime change, take over your government, it will be yours to take. And at the same time, just a couple of days ago, before he was killed, the Ayatollah was saying that within hours we will expand our battlefield beyond its borders. He was preempting the fact that there was going to be a strike. And he went on to say, Iran does not see itself as an isolated island in war, but rather the centre of potential network of confrontations. Are we not, do we think, as we sit here today discussing everything that is happening 6,000 miles away from us, not seeing the possibility of democratic change in Iran, but actually a bloodbath? You have a civilian population who are not armed, and you have an incredibly strong and vengeful Republican Guard who will just flatten them as they've done in the past.
Yes, I mean, there's a huge risk of that. Based on what we've been seeing yesterday, there's been quite a few comparisons, say, to the 2003 Iraq War, but having thought about it over the days, it's sort of similar to me in what we saw in Libya, but the big difference in Libya in 2011 was that there was actually an armed movement against Gaddafi. That is not the case with these undoubtedly incredibly brave Iranians who have been protesting against the Iranian regime. But like you said, there is a huge risk of a bloodbath, and if there is going to be regime change, then it may well require, in fact probably require, further US military force, probably ground troops, and that really would open up more risks in terms of what we would actually get next, which is something that we just don't know.
Yeah, Robert, I mean, do you see other countries in that area actually coming to the help of the people in Iran, or are they absolutely on their own? And as we've just heard Jack say, they're incredibly brave, out on the streets, prepared to demonstrate. But that's not going to be enough against a system that has been in place for 47 years.
Yes, the longevity of the regime is fascinating, and it's interesting how, in terms of international information and propaganda, how poor Trump's preparation was for this. We had no idea really what it was about and what he intended and what the legal justification is. And running behind this, and it will continue for some time, is this whole battle which is being fought in centre stage in foreign policy in the UK between lawfare and warfare. That being said, to answer your question, absolutely right, because of the nature of the culture of Iran. Yes, we're obsessed with Ayatollahs. Even the Ayatollahs are a bit of a sport, a bit of an outside. It's a Persian culture. And this is why there will be very little rescue coming from the region. Yes, there will be sympathizers and empathizers, because there's a large Azeri minority, for example, from countries like Azerbaijan. The key ones are the Arab powers. The Arab powers are interested in trade because it's such a big oil producer and so on. They're not that keen. The Saudis, the UAEs, the Qatars, the Kuwaits and Bahrain, all of which have been targeting, they're not going to come to the help of the insurgent people on the streets of Iran.
They're on their own.
They're on their own.
They're on their own. That is not going to be a good sign for the next, several weeks while this particular insurgence continues, is it?
And this is quite a terrifying situation. I don't think in its current form Iran is ready to transition to democracy.
Why do you say that? I mean, clearly there were people who were prepared to come out onto the streets just a few weeks ago.
Well, a requirement of democracy is the ability to hold free and fair elections. People can vote in an uncoerced manner. And what we're looking at in the region currently is an armed revolutionary guard who don't want that, and a group of people who have been phenomenally brave in their work protesting. And, I have so much admiration, particularly for the women of Iran who have protested the regime, but who are unarmed, who have been under the thumb of a revolutionary regime for almost 50 years, and who aren't in a position really to enforce the infrastructure required to bring in a new government. And there is probably no way for that transition to happen that doesn't require further military action probably by the Americans. And the difficulty is we don't really have any information about what Trump was trying to achieve in Iran here. And we don't have information about what he plans to do over probably the next 10 years, is how long it would take to really move out of this situation.
I mean, so I'm going to come to you just in a moment, but just go back, Jack, to you and Robert. He's not prepared to put boots on the ground. And don't we know in the past that we've had a very poor track record, if you like, in trying to bring about regime change? Just think about what's happened in Afghanistan, in Syria, and in other countries. Unless he's going to be prepared to do that, he cannot win this from the skies, can he?
No, absolutely not. Not in terms of trying to bring democratic change. But like he said, it's had, at best, an incredibly checkered record. And also, it's not something even that the American public would have any tolerance for, really. That's a completely different issue in itself, especially for Donald Trump when it comes to being a midterm year. But actually being able to bring that change to prevent any potential vacuum, security vacuum, which is still not a guaranteed thing, by the way, to prevent even with American troops, because we're talking about huge numbers required. That's going to be necessary to bring some form of peaceful transitional change.
Does it look to you, Robert, as if he doesn't actually have an exit strategy, that he's just made this grand sort of display, if you like, of American power, and that's all he's done?
It's gesture politics. I think it's playing to his domestic situation as much as anything. Midterm elections, probably displacement from attention to Epstein. Let's park that. That's the American domestic thing. The one thing I think that, and I'd be very interested to know what Jack and the others think about this, I find it very difficult to focus on the IRGC. The Revolutionary Guard is not uniform from everybody I've spoken to and who has had to deal with them. Yeah. They fight amongst each other. They're top cats. They're fat cats. They're more like what you got in the old Brezhnev Soviet Union. They're a combinat. They're businesses. They're involved in this, that and the other, including illegal businesses, drugs and so on. Now, we take the emblematic, charismatic leader, Qasem Soleimani, who was taken out by Trump with a strike in Baghdad airport just at the end of the first Trump administration. He wasn't a universal hero. Far from it. He wasn't even a universal hero in the IRGC. And I think that this is the big problem, is that it could break up. And you know what happens when they say when a battle breaks up, they start fighting in ones and twos. You'll have a lot of factional fighting. There are a lot of aggrieved factions. Yes, we've talked about the minorities. I've talked about the solidarity of the Persian identity. But round the edges, there are some very disgruntled and extremely deprived people, like the Baluch in the southeast. There's a Baluch rebellion going on. But they are suffering, sorry, can we mention it on GB News, from the effects of climate change, desertification, and people there are starving. It's a desperate, desperate situation. I'm going ahead. We're bound to discuss the fact that this is a country with no money, which has no currency that works, which adds, Angela, to your picture of anarchy. Yes.
I will come back to you on that, and indeed I will also come back to you as well, Kevin, in just a moment. But we're going to go to Will Godley, because he has some breaking news for us.
Well, Angela, yeah, good morning to you. We've just heard, obviously, on this Sunday morning, speaking at the Vatican, Pope Leo, who has issued a message to the world calling for an end to what he's calling the spiral of violence in the Middle East. He is urging for diplomacy and to promote common good in Iran. He's also saying he is following the situation with deep concern, and as he's issued his prayers this Sunday morning at the Vatican. But of course, what we are seeing at the moment in the Middle East is showing no signs of stopping. Just in the last half an hour, we heard the latest air raid sirens over Israel, as these live pictures of Haifa in Israel are behind me now. As in the last few minutes, the Israeli officials are telling people they no longer have to be in their bomb shelters. The wave of Iranian missiles has already been and gone, and people can leave their bomb shelters but should stay close and stay alert for any future threats. But of course, it's not just Israel who is being attacked by Iranian missiles, but more wider targets throughout the Middle East. Of course, we've seen targets hit in Dubai this morning, and also in the last few minutes in Bahrain as well, a hotel in Manama. I can tell you the Crown Plaza Hotel has been hit, according to the Interior Ministry of Bahrain, causing material damage, but thankfully no casualties. And of course, we know that Israel has sent new missiles to Tehran this morning. Big explosions have been heard and seen in Iran's capital. And this morning, speaking today, the Tehran Province Red Crescent Society has said that Tehran has been hit by 60 attacks in the last 24 hours and 57 people have died there. And in the last hour, I've been on a call with the IDF, who have been giving some details over the last 24 hours about their key operation, the operation they're calling the Roaring Lion. And they said it started with a key precision strike that was intelligence-led. Yesterday morning, there was 2 strikes in which 40 key commanders of the Iranian regime were eliminated, they said, including Khamenei. This key strike happened in just a minute, and that was, after they achieved the strike, led them to then have what they described as the largest air operation in Israeli history, attacking key air defence points in Iran, crippling their missile launch capability. The Israeli officials were saying that before this attack, they were estimating Iran had 2,500 missiles. That now obviously very much depleted, as Iran has been launching missiles throughout the last 24 hours. More, no doubt, predicted throughout the course of the day. And Angela, I'll have the latest updates throughout the morning.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, let me go then to Kevin. First of all, any reaction to what you've just heard of the way in which Iran clearly is getting a thumping, a real hammering now from Israel?
Yeah, and I think I'd agree with the analysis so far on the panel, Angela, that there's a high level of uncertainty. But the key thing here is you're absolutely right. The people on the ground in Iran are not going. They haven't got the munitions. They haven't got the weapons needed in order to take this a step further. So Trump can say that. He knows in reality that can't happen in the short term. It was already said that domestic support for American boots on the ground is non-existent, so that's not going to happen. I think there's another level, still many more levels actually, of military severity that could be levelled on Iran if there isn't some form of regime change or signalling on the nuclear question. That is at the heart of all this. I think some form of accommodation is much more likely from a change in, and the IRGC is crucial in this. I think that's much more likely than a civilian-led insurrection. That's for the birds at this stage. But the nuclear question and commitments on that will give, I think, Trump and Israel what they want from this.
But where's that going to come from? Who's going to lead that?
Well, as I say, I don't think any of us here today can see that coming from the civilian population. I think that comes from Robert's very erudite articulation of the different parties involved at the level underneath the Ayatollah. And before this all happened, there were at times hints of moderation coming out of Iran in terms of acknowledging the economic pain that the people are going through. But I think that's why this next 48 hours, the next 7 days are key, and it links back to the nuclear question, because that is the justification which I think we should actually support.
Well, I'll come back to that a bit later on, because right now we're going to go to Dubai, because we're going to get thoughts from a GB News producer, Quindell, who is stuck in Dubai. Thanks for joining us from there. I think you had a busy night, but have things quietened down a bit now in Dubai this morning?
Yeah, so the first strike actually did happen as I was landing, and we were not given any sort of information of what's going on, what the situation is. All we were told, we had the boards in front of us just telling us what's going on, delayed, and then it just was a clean sweep of cancellations. Running back and forth to the desks, no one was giving any sort of details of what happened. We didn't have access to any sort of internet, no Wi-Fi. Obviously, our networks, UK phone networks, weren't working as well. After a lot of pushing, after a lot of pressure, we were told the airstrikes have taken place. There's literally no way for anyone to leave, and there was, I just can't tell you how mismanaged it was. There were people, elderly people with mobility issues who had no way of getting around. They had just been put at the departure lounges and told, make your way out of here. I mean, if you don't have a visa, if you cannot get out, then you just stay where you are. There's nothing we can do. I asked someone how many people there are at the airport right now. They couldn't put a figure on it. They said there is at least 100,000 foreigners stranded. And literally, I'd say there was a fleet of coaches. I got onto one of those fleets of coaches and I was told that Emirates is directing us to a local airport. We were taken to a local hotel, and we were taken to the hotel and told that Emirates had not informed the hotel of anything. All the passengers on the coach were told to make their own arrangements. There was families with young children. There were sick people, heart patients, diabetics, asthmatics, people with no medication whatsoever, no access to any sort of medical help. All of their medication was in their checked baggage, and they're still in their checked baggage. After a lot of pressure, after a lot of screaming and crying, people were actually given hotels. Last night, I think 20 minutes after I left the airport was under attack for the first time. I've been shifted to Jumeirah, Emirates Tower, and close by, I think a lot of the hotels have been under attack. Last night, I think 2 a.m., there were sirens, and we were told to leave the hotel in the middle of the night. Young children screaming and crying, running down the corridors in their pajamas, and people who have the local Dubai phone connection were getting warning high alert messages on their phones. I obviously didn't. I just heard people screaming and heard the row, and I just grabbed everything and ran, and I tried to help as many people as I could come out. A lot of people with mobility issues had to be helped out, and there were tears everywhere. People were crying. Children are upset.
It really does sound, Kendall, as if last night there was absolute chaos, presumably because the authorities there were just caught on the hop and didn't expect this. And also, as I understand it, the two fires that we saw on the Palm and on the hotel in the centre of Dubai, they weren't actually direct hits. They were fires as a result of shrapnel. So can you confirm that or not?
I'm afraid the conditions that we've been put in over here, we have no access. I'm not sure if you saw, but just a little while ago, I think it was just a little while before I joined on to you, I'm not allowed at this point in time to leave the hotel.
But isn't that sensible? I mean, do you think that's a sensible thing,
no,
that actually you stay there for your own safety?
It's a very sensible decision, but at this current point in time, the hotels are a big target. At this point in time, the major hotspots that are being targeted and that all the warnings are being given to are the major hotels here. The hotels are stuck in the sense that Emirates has not made any sort of effort to coordinate with the hotels they have sent passengers to. They have booked them for 2 days. And after 2 days, there is a very, very high chance that these passengers will be on the streets and unattended. And I'm telling you that you don't carry a whole log of medication onto a plane with you. You put a lot of it into your checked baggage. I've met people who are they don't have access to life-saving medication. There is people who have had heart surgery. There is diabetic patients. There is people. I met this guy for breakfast this morning, and he was crying. He says, I urgently need dialysis. I have been told, make your own arrangement, find somewhere to get a dialysis clinic. I can't speak the language. I can't find anyone to help me. I'm scared. I'm not going to make it out of here. There's not a single person from Emirates has visited the hotel. They are not receiving the phone calls.
You're painting a very, very grim picture there, I have to say. But
I'm telling you the facts, unfortunately. The situation we were told, 3 o'clock this afternoon, local time, the airport was supposed to open. And by open, I don't mean the airspace was supposed to open, but the the employees, the staff of the hotel was supposed to come back into the airport at 3 p.m. Unfortunately, the second strike targeting the airport took place today, and they have scrapped that plan for 24 hours. No staff is to enter. The airport has been sealed, but nobody is allowed to enter Dubai airport. So the process is going to be even longer because there's no access to check baggage for any passengers on there, and there is no communication. Emirates should send a personnel.
Well, I'm sure they will. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off because,
Sure.
as you will understand, of course, being a producer here on television, that our time is limited. But as I say, you are painting a
Totally.
very grim picture, and I do hope that perhaps the Emirates now will be able to get their act together and at least, as you say, help those people who are having difficulty getting access to medications. Thanks very much indeed for that update, and you stay safe yourself there. Be safe.
Thank you very much.
Let me just come back, if I may, to Kevin, to you, because one of the things that we've been following this morning are the ways in which various leaders around the world are reacting to what has happened. As a former Labour candidate, I have to ask you, where do we stand with Keir Starmer at the moment? I mean, if quoting to you what Carney said from Canada, the president, he was saying you either are at the table or you're on the menu. And at the moment, we are on the menu. Worse than that, we seem to be on the fence. And Keir Starmer is not saying one way or another whether or not he actually supports the action of Israel and the United States.
Well, Angela, you're frightening me there because you're inside my mind. I think there's. I've been encouraged by what the Prime Minister said in terms of the regime is abhorrent, the murderous nature of the regime and the way they treat dissent. I do agree with you as a big supporter of the Prime Minister and the government. I do think our language should be more like Canada this morning. You know, I don't think that, you know, there's no doubt we've had legal advice, right? You can see it. We've had legal advice saying that in terms of international law, the government's not clear that what's happened is legal. But I think there's a moral dimension, there's a self-interest, the British government dimension. And I think that I'm much more in favour of Mark Carney's, who's a big friend of this country's language this morning. And I look to see the government moving there this week.
Do we think that we are going to, or do we think Kenny Badenoch is going to actually come out and give them a real hammering at PMQs on Wednesday?
No, I don't think we are, because I'm sorry to be rude to Kevin. I think that on so many matters of this, the Prime Minister's indecision is final. He has been so equivalent. I mean, he's coming up from a very, very low position. Appalling performance, as it turned out, at the Munich conference, berating his allies for not increasing expenditure on defence. And in fact, they were, if you take Poland and Germany just for a kick-off, but even the Dutch and the Danes at a much greater rate. Then he comes home and talks to your friend Rachel Reeves from accounts and says, there's no money. And there's no money. Oh, we can't do this.
I don't get the Rachel Reeves from accounts rudeness. What's that about? She's the...
Well, but she read the accounts. That's what she said to him. There is no money in it.
That lazy shorthand takes away from your other really good points, calling the Chancellor Rachel from accounts.
Well, let's not get into arguments about characters here. Let's just stick to what we've got. And I'm just going to stop you both for a second because I know that Will again has some more breaking news for us.
Well, Angela, thank you. And let's bring you some live pictures of Israel now, because in the last few minutes we've heard from the IDF, who have said that a short while ago they have identified missiles launched from Iran towards the territory of the State of Israel. So in the last few minutes they've issued their early warning system, urging people in Israel to get to their safety bomb shelters, safety bunkers, where they can shelter from any Iranian missiles coming in the next few minutes. We will expect to be hearing air raid sirens sounding out throughout Israel. The areas affected go right from Haifa up in the north to Jerusalem, to Tel Aviv, to the Sea of Galilee as well, extending all over Israel as they're expecting these missiles. The IDF have said defensive systems are operating to intercept the threat, and that precautionary directive has been sent to people's mobile phones in Israel, asking them to act responsibly and get to safety. And so that alert, we'll be hearing that air raid siren understandably shortly, as these missiles are due to enter Israeli airspace momentarily. We've also got an update from the UK Maritime Agency as well. They have received a report of an incident 2 nautical miles north of Oman. The crew have been evacuated and are safe. Authorities are investigating. Vessels are advised to transit with caution and report any suspicious activity to the UK Maritime Agency. We understand at least 150 tankers carrying crude and oil are currently in the strait. They've dropped anchor, waiting for this tension perhaps to ease. Dozens of cargo ships there as well. This, of course, is one of the busiest shipping straits in the world. And this report from the UK Maritime Agency just coming into us, a report of an incident 2 nautical miles north of Oman.
Thanks very much indeed. In fact, the news that you just brought us brings us on to another aspect of what is going on in the Middle East at the moment, and that is the commercial aspect, the economic aspect. The Straits of Hormuz are busiest. Sorry?
It's the first time that this has really happened. They've threatened it before.
Now
But
they're doing
remember,
it.
once the attack started, what was left of the command, and they were getting together, and as you were saying, the command is still there, and they were saying, Straits of Hormuz closed. When you look at things like the export of LNG, something like an enormous figure, 30–40% of exportable LNG comes through there. And the other thing, I don't want to say, we must take up what Israel is doing in looking at the air defence picture, because what they seem to be warning from what Tom was reporting is the big stuff is coming in now. Actually, the attack up to now has been quite sporadic. It's been all over the place. As a very senior British diplomat who is at the command centre with Yvette Cooper at the moment was saying to me this morning, why drop an attack on Oman? It's all over the place. But what we must say is that although Israel has one of the best tactical air defence systems against drone and missile attack, namely Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, that trio, it's not perfect. And none is perfect in the world. And there is the high risk that, as I say, if they put the big stuff, and it seems we're getting into the last desperate part of the Iranian counteroffensive, the fear is, quite clearly in Tel Aviv command as well, that just that handful, and it really is a handful, 6, 7, 8 will get through. That's why they're saying stand by, and you really have to go to the deep shelters.
And this is Iran now throwing in the big guns, literally throwing it, which leads us very well to my next guest, who is Peter Caddick-Adams, the NATO historian, journalist, and ex-reserve officer. He joins us now. Peter, I think, did you manage to hear there what Will was telling us and what Robert was just saying about the big guns now, that Iran is now throwing everything at Israel, and that really this is the point where Israel is really going to come under extreme pressure now?
Still not hearing. No.
I can't hear.
Its leader, supreme leader, is now no more. He's been taken out. There was a lot of confusion yesterday evening as to whether that was the case, along with his line of succession. And so the big question puzzling a lot of Iranians and all the outside observers and all the military participants is actually who is running the show in Iran at the moment. And whatever the committee is that's quite opaque, probably accounts for the fact that they're flinging missiles left, right and centre without any clear strategy, because their succession has just been wiped out and all their war plans have probably been destroyed. And they're better at proxy fighting through sabotage and vehicle-borne explosives and all the rest of it than they are at raw combat. And we've seen that before. They're very good at rhetoric as well. But they do realise that they have to get off as many missiles as they can, because Israeli intelligence is all over Iran and they know where every single rocket launcher is. So they need to fire these off before they get targeted and hit by the Americans and Israelis. So there's that quid pro quo going on as we speak.
So are you saying, Peter, that these are really almost panic measures? I mean, I've got a list in front of me of some of the armaments that they have in their arsenal, including cruise missiles with a 1,000-mile range. They have ballistic missiles. They have all sorts of stuff in their armory. Are you suggesting that they're actually throwing everything they've got at it in a fairly short term while there isn't real leadership at the top of the armed forces there, so that they can actually create as much damage as possible and actually perhaps just hold off further attacks from America and Israel?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons for attacking their neighbours was to try and fracture any coalition that might be formed against them. And actually what they've achieved is exactly the opposite. And all those Gulf states that normally are at loggerheads with each other have come together in opposing Iran, not least because they've all had missiles fired at them from Saudi to Oman. I mean, poor old Oman, who were mediating between Iran and America in Geneva until Friday. I mean, that's bizarre. I think what we have to worry about is that the leadership comes together, appoints a new commander who's a hardline fanatic, gets his act together, and starts a campaign. I mean, time is running out for that to happen. But that's probably next on the cards, and that's the motivation for the Islamic Republican National Guard to sort of carry on. Because, you know, what's around the corner for their martyrdom, they probably welcome that. But they'd like to take a few with them before they go. And that's what we've got to be very, very wary of. But it's all down to boots on the ground. I mean, you can only do so much from the air. And if we're reliant on the Iranians to take control of their own destiny without a single Israeli or Western boot on the ground in Iran, then I think we've got real problems as to, you know, what happens next. And that will be what's really worrying the Iranian population at the moment.
I mean, you mentioned there Qatar, Kuwait, the other countries now that are getting the fallout from this. All of those United Arab Emirates do not really want to be part of this conflict. I think they are all at the moment staying at arm's length. But are you suggesting that as near neighbours who are now themselves coming under attack, that they indeed may have to consider some form of retaliation, some form of support for the population of Iran if they want to overthrow this government and gain some form of democracy? That is highly unlikely, isn't it? Because they have in the past never shown any interest at all in getting involved in armed conflict.
No, you're absolutely right. They've got far too much at stake economically, so they wouldn't wish to get involved, and all their military structures are of a defensive posture. But nevertheless, they still have to defend themselves. And, you know, to that extent, we've got the RAF in Qatar who are teaching the Qatari Air Force how to fly their F-35s. That explains why we had some RAF aircraft airborne that was shooting down drones over Qatari airspace. I mean, you can draw lines, but in this kind of fluid situation where there are a lot of international borders and frontiers, it's quite difficult to stop a campaign and a conflict like this from leaking, and that's what we've already seen.
And if it does leak, presumably that would lead to a major conflict in this area. We're talking about not just Iran being attacked by the United States and by Israel, but perhaps by a conflict which actually spreads to other parts of the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, nobody really wants that, except a bunch of Iranian hotheads. And the initiative, we all hope, has passed from their hands. And they are prisoners to a sort of chain of events which will eventually seize their demise. But, you know, I reiterate the point, you know, all of our concerns really now is what is summarized in the question: what happens next in Iran to the Iranian people? Because there doesn't seem to be a successor regime in place. There's the Shah's son in America kicking his heels, but we don't know how much support he has within Iran itself. And there's, you know, go back to the question that you were originally teasing out in the studio, which is the Prime Minister's sort of rather lackluster performance. there is the wider question that the world is grappling with, which is how do you deal with an illegal invasion, which is what this appears to be? Is the old rules-based order by which we settled our differences internationally after 1945 coming to an end? And I can see that the Prime Minister looked at this very much from a legal point of view. And that's probably got in the way of it, the sort of realpolitik by which a lot of other leaders like Carney in Canada and certainly President Trump have judged the situation. I mean, I don't think Trump sheds any tears that what he has done is technically illegal, if he was even aware. But the consequences mean that Beijing is now looking at Taiwan in terms of an illegal invasion. Do they have a little more leeway than they might have done? Russia can feel retrospectively justified in its step into Ukraine. We're entering new international territory as well.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. And you have given actually a major question for my panel to answer. And I think I'm going to start with you, Laura. I mean, that is the question. How do you deal with an illegal invasion, which is, I mean, the United Nations actually have come out and questioned the legality of this. And certainly, as you say, it opens the door to China and to Russia, who can then justify the ambitions that they have. So how do you deal with this now?
I think that we found in the last 5 to 10 years that the rules-based order that we've been operating on for so long and assumptions about the cold, hard facts of international law aren't serving us very well anymore. And the difficulty currently, we found this sort of across the Middle East, is that any retaliation against any level of aggression, we know that Iran have been carrying out terrorism in the UK for a long time now, will almost always be illegal. And that is a very difficult thing to deal with. Law is not black and white. And in Starmer's case, we need to look at who Starmer is getting his legal advice from. I think that there are two key things influencing Starmer at the moment. The first one isn't the law at all, and I think we should make that clear. It's the Gorton and Denton by-election. He has just done terribly in a by-election which he knows was fueled by a significant contingent of people voting on foreign policy issues, voting on the Middle East, voting motivated by faith. He now sees the threat that the Greens independents pose to him, and he doesn't want to make any statements or get involved in a way which would hurt that domestic vote. And I think Keir Starmer would choose that domestic vote against foreign policy and against the people of Iran if he needed to. And the second is that his main legal advisor is Hermer. And Hermer is extremely rigid and very, very hostile to these situations and completely unrealistic. And the priority right now needs to be what action is necessary in Iran to enable some sort of transition to stable leadership. I think democracy is probably a pipe dream right now, but to prevent violence on the street and the massacring of civilians. And if we talk about international law constantly and condemnatory statements, we're not going to actually move to a real politic which is necessary.
You were nodding your head.
Well, parts of it, but then I disagree with the conclusion that the Gorton, Denton and Gorton by-election, which I was at on a number of occasions, door knocking. So I agree. I mean, and I will flag that the Green Party was scandalous in that election in how they weaponised the Gaza issue, leaflets in Urdu saying "punish them, Starmer for Gaza." But I think the Prime Minister does need to move, as I said earlier, to just a more free and eloquent expression that we do support what's happened. It's in our national strategic interest that there are no nuclear weapons in Iran. It's in our national strategic interest that Israel's right to exist as the only democracy in the Middle East is protected. We can't equivocate about that, and that's not in line with the Labour Party that I was proud to campaign for, and am proud to campaign for, that before the general election was unequivocal that it would prescribe the IRGC. And so the Prime Minister needs to, it's been good so far, but we do need to toughen it up a bit.
Well, let's get the opposite view politically on that then from the Shadow Minister for Defence, Marc Francois, who joins us now. Marc, I think you've probably been listening to, I hope you have, to some of the discussion that we've had here. Where do you and where does your party and your party leader stand on this issue? Are you going to come out in support of what the United States and Israel is doing at the moment, or are you, as we have been hearing this morning, join Keir Starmer on the fence?
No, we came out in support of it yesterday. So let me read you the message that my party leader, Kemi Badenoch, put out yesterday I quote, "I stand with our allies in the US and Israel as they take on the Islamic Republic of Iran and its vile regime." That is Thatcherite clarity. And we said that yesterday, within a few hours of it becoming apparent that the airstrikes had begun. So we support this. The question is, where in God's name is our Prime Minister? Look, on the matter of international law, it looks as if what has happened is that Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, has told the Cabinet that, in his legal opinion, they cannot support this American action. That's why, on the Camilla show this morning, John Healey was performing somersaults when Camilla asked him repeatedly, does the British government support this action? So they should support this action. One, all countries are entitled to the right of self-defence under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. That is a well-established principle for decades. Two, we know that Iran, for decades, was attempting to assemble a nuclear weapon. Even after the American strikes of several weeks ago, they did not abandon those efforts. There were then negotiations between the Americans and the Iranians, and still the Iranians refused to promise that they would not attempt to create a nuclear weapon. So this American-Israeli action is partly to absolutely close off that avenue so that no mullah-led regime in Iran will have a nuclear weapon to threaten them or us or the rest of the Middle East or the Western democracies. Three, remember that it was Iran, we now know, that was behind the abhorrent October the 7th attack on Israel via their proxies Hamas. They've funded Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis for many, many years. Four, they provided the Houthis with missiles to attack Saudi Arabia and British ships in the Red Sea for a number of years. The Houthis, armed and funded by Iran, have attacked British ships in the Red Sea. Five, our troops that fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, a number were sadly killed, many more suffered life-changing injuries as a result of IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and even some primitive anti-tank weapons. The technology for those weapons came from Iran. Iran were arming the Taliban and teaching them technically how to carry out those attacks. So Iran was responsible for killing hundreds of British soldiers in both of those conflicts and maiming thousands of others. Six, the Iranians have been supplying for years Shahed drones and the technology to manufacture them, if you like, under license in Russia to the Russian regime. So we are supposed to be firm allies of Ukraine. The Prime Minister at the dispatch box, I've seen him do it, has said time and again, we will back Ukraine to the hilt for as long as it takes. Well, the Russians are using Iranian technology to rain down drones on Ukrainian cities. I was there with an all-party group of 20 MPs last week in Ukraine, in Odessa. That was attacked by Iranian-designed drones. We went to Kyiv. That was attacked by Iranian-designed drones. So on a whole range of levels, Iran has been an enemy of this country for decades. But Lord Hermer tells the Prime Minister and the Cabinet that they cannot support American and Israeli military action against that regime because, in his opinion, it would be contrary to international law. Well, I've given you a whole bunch of reasons why I believe that's not true.
Mark, can I just interrupt you very quickly, because I think you've given us a very, very detailed view there of where you and the party stand on this. Bearing in mind, as you say, that Iran has been funding, supporting and supplying arms to all of these terrorist organisations, how concerned are you if we are going to take a strong line in support of Israel and America, that in fact we will start having terrorist reprisals here in Britain in a way that the Iranians have already suggested might happen?
Well, there we are in the hands of our highly competent security services, and we rely on those to protect us against terrorism, and I salute the work that they do. But there's another point I want to make quickly. I hope I've dealt with how weak the government are. The question is, who's the Prime Minister of this country? Is it Keir Starmer?
Well, can you make it short? Because we've actually got some breaking news here. Yes, what is the point that you want to make briefly, please?
OK, on the Chagos deal, I think that hopefully is now dead. It looks as if the Americans asked to use the runway at Diego Garcia. It looks as if the British government said no. The Americans have an absolute veto on that deal under a 1966 treaty. Basically, if the Americans veto it, the deal is dead. If Starmer refused to let Trump use that runway, then I hope and believe the deal will be dead. The Prime Minister must come to the Commons on Monday. He needs to answer all these questions to MPs in the House of Commons. Where do you stand on this? Do you back this action or not? Did the Americans ask to use the runway at Diego Garcia? And if they did, what was your answer? And by the way, who actually runs this government? Is it you or the Attorney General?
Mark Francois, thank you very much indeed. We'll get that answer on Monday, I'm sure. In the meantime, Will has joined us in the studio again with more breaking news.
Angela, this time let's go back to the Gulf, because we've heard from the UK Maritime Operations Centre, who have said they've got a second report now of a vessel that has been struck, this time 50 nautical miles off the coast of Oman. They have said that a vessel was struck by an unknown projectile above the waterline. They said there was initial reports of the engine room being on fire. That fire is now under control on the ship, and the cause of the fire, the projectile, will now be investigated by the Maritime's Operations Centre. That, of course, follows the vessel we heard about just under about half an hour ago that was struck just 2 nautical miles off the coast of Oman. So some breaking news there as sirens continue to sound across Israel. I also just want to tell you a line we've heard from the IDF in the last few minutes as their strikes in Iran continue this afternoon and this morning. They have said that they estimate that they have reduced Iran's missile production by at least 1,500 ballistic missiles through targeting production sites, launching sites and the missiles themselves, which is a key amount of missiles, because before this operation was launched, the IDF told me on a call earlier they estimated Iran had 2,500 missiles in their stockpile. So this operation has now prevented them from making 1,500 more missiles. Also, I think I just want to add a couple of things that they told me on this call. When I questioned them, something you've been speaking about today, Angela, boots on the ground, I was asking them whether that's something Israel is looking to do after they achieve air supremacy throughout Iran. They told me that they have air supremacy in parts of Iran, but are working on achieving air supremacy across the entire country. But at this stage, they told me it wasn't reasonably on the table for Israel to put boots on the ground in Iran. I also asked the IDF spokesperson whether they asked the UK to be involved in their Operation Rising Lion. They told me they couldn't comment on conversations between world leaders, but they did say communications between them and the British Army has been great throughout this war.
Will, thank you very much indeed for that update. I'm going to come back to my panel and just pick up on something that Mark Francois was talking about at the end, which is that really our own security services now do come into play now, don't they? Because we are looking at the possible retaliation from terrorist organisations who are funded by Iran, who will be presumably taking some kind of action against those countries who are supporting the action that is happening at the moment. How likely do you think that is, and do you think that really Britain now should be on red alert?
Well, it should absolutely be on red alert. I can't necessarily comment on how likely a threat is to the UK at the moment, but given the volatility of the situation right now, it would only be sensible, to say the least, to be on high alert.
Robert, You were talking to us before about the rather disparate country that Iran is. It is religiously, it is in terms of the political groups that they have, the defence corps themselves, the army themselves. Do we call them an army? The army, of course, are quite different from the Revolutionary Guard, aren't they? But
up to 200,000 regulars, at least that in reserves, and they're the political dog. I'd be very interested to hear what the rest of the panel think about it. That has never really barked.
Exactly.
They've always watched. They have been deprived and starved of funding because that goes to the fat cats again.
So are we
sorry to use it, but they are very fat cats.
Are we looking at the possibility then that the army itself could be the ones that actually rise up against the Revolutionary Guard?
I can now say the brother of a former president, Hatami's brother, was a doctor. We were in a conference, some years ago, just freewheeling conversation. And for his money, he said that, and his brother's consideration was that could be a decisive move if the army absolutely moves. I want sort of apologies for sloppy talking. I do think we're onto something in the panel, to core, in the reconciliation of lawfare and warfare. The accumulation of international law, which is a living, breathing thing, is terribly important. I have lived with this with my practical life as a working frontline reporter. The Falklands, hugely important there, but above all in Kosovo, where the legality, as you know, was quite questionable at times. And to say that this is questionable is no bad thing, but it has to be reconciled. And I'm going to put a subset, which Mark, I'm surprised, didn't raise. We do have treaty obligations to countries like Qatar, their particular specific agreement. Why we've got aircraft down there, we've got a joint agreement. We've got a joint RAF Qatar Air Force squadron, would you believe it? So we will have to consider that. That's where it comes in. Sorry, we've been rude about our politicians. No, I'm going to be full of praise. I think that they are well aware of this and where it will take us, and that's where the debate will go. Because as the latest thing to come back, I think in terms of kinetic, the hardware, the bang-bang, we're going to come to a climax, I think, within the next 36 hours, because I think, as Tom was suggesting, I think they're going to run out of ammunition by then.
The Iranians are going to...
Yes, and the American command is very well aware. That's why they want to conserve it. I think that they've got in mind something like a 70-day campaign, because really, beyond that, they haven't got much more.
And you make a very interesting point about the way in which Israel is likely to react if this is going to be, as you say, within 36 hours, they run out of ammunition. I'm hoping later to talk to someone who is in Tel Aviv at the moment to discover the sort of network that they have within Iran, which can give them more information about where the army stands.
Absolutely fascinating.
It's fascinating.
And it's not just Mossad.
It isn't just Mossad, no, it'll be all of the others as well. My panel, incidentally, just to remind you, I have Laura Brown, who is commissioning editor at The Spectator, Kevin Craig, former Labour candidate, Dr. Jack Clayton, who is a US foreign policy analyst, and Robert Fox, the defence editor of The Evening Standard. We will be joining you again we're going to stay with the panel, in fact, when we come back for the second half of the programme today. But let me ask you, Jack, because you have been listening to this as someone who is an analyst on everything that is happening. What do you think about what Robert has just said? 36 hours, 72 hours, and maybe the worst of it will all be over because Iran will actually run out of ammunition.
Well, I mean, a quick end to this would certainly be preferable. I do tend to agree. I think actually that their munitions are limited, and actually one of the reasons for that as well is because they were so badly damaged by the 12-day conflict last year. I mean, actually, really, we ought to be framing what's been happening actually as an extension and build-up to right now from that initial set of fighting. So I do tend to agree, yeah.
You've put that sort of time frame on it. Where do you both stand, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, Iran's ability to generate missiles was massively harmed last year, and Israel will continue to harm it. I think what they will try and do is they will throw everything they have at the Iron Dome and their perceived allies of the US nearby over the next 2 days. And I suspect that is all they have. They also, their leadership is falling apart. They have no succession. So decisions about where to fire missiles are going to become more and more difficult. I don't give them much longer than a week.
No, and actually, this is an indication of the way in which there is no leadership at the top at the moment. This is not something that you would do strategically if you wanted to win the war. Throw everything that you've got at it and actually run out of ammunition.
Yeah, I think a week is a good call. I think Robert was well on it with the discussion about the next echelon of leadership in the military there, and I can't see this lasting any longer than 7 days. And I think a settlement will come forward on the nuclear question.
If I may, there's also a kind of real problem for the Iranians that they can't really break up, even well, it's an incredibly small coalition, of course, between the US and Israel, but take something like the first Gulf War, when Saddam tried to break up that much larger coalition with Scuds. There isn't really much that the Iranians can do. Even trying to attack the Gulf states, if anything, is just hardening their attitudes. And that was, of course, not positive in the first place about Iran.
So many questions still to ask and to answer, but we have another hour ahead of us. So to my panel, thank you very much indeed. You are all staying with me now. And also my colleague, Will Godley, will be bringing us up to date on any of the latest news that we have. But I think what has come out of this first hour that we've had is quite interesting, that Iran clearly now is headless. It does not have proper leadership, and anything could happen within the next 72 hours. You're watching GB News. It's 12 noon and it is the 1st of March. We have breaking news that President Trump has confirmed the death of the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, describing him as one of the most evil people in history. And in response, Iran has announced a 40-day period of mourning, whilst its neighbour, Iraq, will mourn for just 3 days. Not so much breaking news, because I think we've been aware of the death of the Ayatollah for some time now. But my goodness, the things that have happened subsequently since that was announced have been stark. Iranian state TV, for instance, has confirmed not only the death of the Ayatollah, but also the death of the Iranian Army Chief of Staff. The country's top security official has said that the US and Israel seek to plunder and disintegrate Iran, with the country's parliament speaker calling leaders of the US and Israel filthy criminals. Ahmed Valdi, pictured on the left, has been named as the new commander-in-chief for Iran's Revolutionary Guard, and Ayatollah Arfi has been appointed temporary supreme leader. President Putin has expressed his condolences over the death of the Ayatollah, calling his death a cynical murder. While North Korea are calling the Israeli attacks and the US military operation against Iran an illegal aggression. But the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that with Iran's supreme leader gone, there is renewed hope for the country's people. The IDF has shared footage from their operations to dismantle the Islamic regime's missile launchers. And since striking began, Israel have dropped over 1,200 pieces of munitions in Iran over the past 24 hours. One British expat has been wounded in Oman after the dock port was targeted by Iranian drones. We can also reveal that an oil tanker has been attacked near the coast of Oman, and 20 people at the country's Maritime Security Centre, with 4 confirmed injured. Now, here are the latest scenes at the US consulate in Pakistan, showing locals protesting against the strikes in Iran. Multiple casualties have been confirmed after security forces opened fire on pro-Iranian protesters. Elsewhere, scenes of jubilation are filling the streets of Tehran after an end of a regime from the man who has ruled Iran with an iron fist for decades. Iran has unleashed a wave of missile and drone attacks across the region, striking American allies and US military targets in Dubai, Doha, Manama, and Kuwait City. The Israeli militaries say that the majority of aerial defense systems in western and central Iran have been dismantled, and they intend to harm Iran's land-to-land and land-to-air missiles. And this is Dubai last night, with reports not only tourists have been struck. But its international airport, which is the world's busiest, has also allegedly been hit by Iran. Roughly 250,000 Brits live in Dubai, and thousands more will currently be on holiday there. US Central Command have released a series of images depicting their first 24 hours of Operation Fury. The US air defences have just intercepted a drone over a US military base near Erbil airport in Iraq. And businesses will be impacted as all vessels transit through the Strait of Hormuz have been suspended until further notice. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, spoke to my colleague Camilla Tominey earlier today. Here's what he had to say about the ongoing situation.
We, the British, were no part of the strikes yesterday and overnight. We share the primary aim that the US have and allies in the region have, that Iran should never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. And our UK actions, with stepping up our UK defences in recent weeks, flying the skies yesterday, as we will do again today, as part of a coordinated regional defensive action, is all about defending our UK personnel, our bases and our regional allies. And we're doing that alongside those allies, including with the US. We were no part of the strikes. We are concentrating all our efforts. We're concentrating all our efforts on the defensive actions that the UK can uniquely contribute, not just to, and my job, to protect British citizens, military and civilian, that are in the region, but also to protect our allies and our bases there. And that's what we're doing. We're doing that in a coordination with allies. It's why we've got planes in the air now. It's why we've got more weapon systems in the region, more radars in the region, because I deployed those several weeks ago in anticipating the potential for this sort of tension. But as the Prime Minister said yesterday, Iran can end this. Iran can end this. It can stop its increasingly indiscriminate attacks widely across the Middle East. It can end its weapons programs and return to the sort of negotiations that long-term will secure the stability in the region. On the contrary, we were putting extra defences into the region several weeks ago. We've been leading the way with UK planes in the air that have been protecting other regional allies. And I, for one, do not mourn the end of the Ayatollah. He led a regime that is a source of evil, murdering its own citizens, sponsoring and exporting terror, including to Britain over the years. And now it's responsible for an escalating level of risk because of its widespread, increasingly uncontrolled and less indiscriminate attacks on allies in the region that put UK people at risk as well. Our first focus and our primary focus, our full focus, is on the defensive action that we can contribute, not just to protecting our own people in the region, but to the wider regional stability and the prevention of further escalation. Those are my three top priorities as Defence Secretary. And that sits alongside the determination that the Prime Minister is showing over the weekend, speaking to E3 leaders, leaders in the wider Middle East, as well as to President Trump. I'm just not going to talk about the internal government discussions, nor am I going to talk about the discussions we have with close allies, including the US. Judge us by our actions. We were not part of the strikes against Iran, but we're leading the way with defensive action. Our full focus is in contributing to that. Protecting UK people who are in the region, reinforcing regional stability for the long term. My first focus is on our UK personnel. It's also on UK civilians, and I know how worried people will be as they see some of these indiscriminate Iranian strikes, not just on military targets, but on hotels in Dubai and Bahrain, and on Kuwait's civilian airport. Just to give you an example of how serious the risk is, just yesterday on that Bahraini military base, we had 300 UK personnel, some of whom were within a few hundred yards of the missile strikes on that base. This is why, as Defence Secretary, my first focus is on the defensive action that we take, abiding by international law at all times, but making sure that we do what we can to keep British personnel safe, secure our bases, and support the regional stability and the protection of regional allies. That's what we're being asked to do. That's what we're stepping up to do.
And that was the Defence Secretary John Healey talking to my colleague Camilla Tominley earlier this morning in her programme. And listening to that is my panel. And I'd like to get the reaction, obviously, to what Healey was just saying. And I've been joined by the commissioning editor at The Spectator, Lara Brown, former Labour candidate Kevin Craig, also US foreign policy analyst Dr. Jack Clayton, and the defence editor of the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Robert, I'm going to come to you first, because before we went into our short break there, you were saying something that I think was fascinating, that you were putting a time limit on how long this conflict, between America and Israel and Iran can last, this present incursion, if you like. You put a time limit on it of 72 hours? How could...
peak bombardment from Iran.
Exactly.
I just don't think they've got any more shots in the locker from that. They want to test, as Kevin was saying, the Iron Dome defences. That's the first thing. And cause as much trouble as they can. Remember, the leitmotif of the 21st century is what you do, disruption.
But what happens after that? That's the thing. What happens after we've had 72 hours or whatever it is, and they run out of ammunition?
That is the big 72-day question, which you have raised continuously throughout this discussion. Can they produce, can the regime, the rump of the regime, produce a credible armed force? And it is armed force. One, to keep the domestic population and domestic protests down, and two, to strike back to show to Shia militia allies, that's Shiite, in the region, we are still a force. So I don't know if I think... I'd love to know what the joint planning between Israel and CENTCOM and the US command was, because I'm sure they will have gamed that through.
You think they have got an end strategy then?
No, I think that they say what we're facing with a country of 91 million people plus, what happens if we have an insurgency which is going to be far more like the Peasants' Revolt? By that I mean a popular uprising, a jacquerie all over the place, because this happens, it's more and more common the world over, including parts of France and the UK, where you get spontaneous explosions, unconnected. And can the centre hold? And I think one of the questions that we're asking they've got to do, they've got less than 36 hours to do it, to put a credible security command together in Tehran or whatever. Because we now know the name that hasn't come up all that much, but you have mentioned, I think one of the crucial figures is going to be Ali Larijani. Ali Larijani, at one point, when he was the long-term speaker of the Majlis, was regarded as the acceptable face, fluent in English and so on. What a jolly good chap he was. He's turned out to be a real hard repressor. I'm not being sloppy in my language there. The man who has led the repression of the latest uprising. He is calling together an ad hoc Security Council today. That sinks or swims, because the problem is, I'm sorry to be very old-fashioned and non-Marxist in my historical analysis, I'm going on personalities. And we have to go back to the personality of Ali Khamenei. Ali Khamenei ran a very tight ship based on the family clan. It was Corleone in spades, because what he had was the family, and he tried to get his second son, and that faction will still be pushing the second son to take over as supreme leader as we speak. And they had round them a carapace of very select, very well regarded, very well rewarded IRGC. Now they're going to push to take over.
And be as hardline
as ever. But can they carry the country? Possibly not, for all the reasons that we've stated. But this is the kind of thing that somebody that is absolutely brought up on clan politics, as I am, and clanismo, as the Italians call it, is going to be the order of the day. I'm not saying anything new that any Israeli interlocutor or colleague that I've spoken to wouldn't appreciate immediately. And that's what's going on. And I think that that's actually also where the Brits, the French, but particularly the Brits, are very, very important. We've got good Farsi speakers among our diplomatic corps, and they are deeply in this. And I think, contrary to what we're saying, I think as we drift along, we will become more valuable to Trump and Trump's military. I should be quite careful. They do talk to each other an awful lot.
They do. Right. We'll come back to that, and I'll get the panel's reaction to what you've just suggested. But what I'd like to do now is go straight to Tel Aviv, because I'm joined there by a security expert who is in Tel Aviv at the moment, Avner Wielan. Avner, thank you so much for joining us. What is actually happening in Tel Aviv? Because the last report we had quite recently from Will Godney was saying that there are more strikes on Tel Aviv and Israel in general, and that you are all under fire again. What is actually happening, please?
Yeah, so we are constantly under fire since this morning. We had a few rounds of rockets being shot, or missiles were being shot at us from Iran. Thankfully, I'm not aware of any casualties today. We had one killed last night. And I think that what we see is that Iran is not being able to match Israeli defense, air defense. We don't see the large amounts that we saw being shot at us in June or in previous rounds. I don't know if it's because of their lack of capability, or are they saving some of their ammunition or some of the rockets to extend this conflict for longer. But as for now, we see many sirens. We go in and out of the shelter, but thankfully, we've been able to intercept most, if not all of them.
One of the suggestions that's been made here in the studio is that possibly Iran is throwing everything at you and is eventually going to run out of ammunition. How practical, how realistic is that assumption?
So I don't know, but I think that I wouldn't rule it out. If we look at the estimations before this conflict started, we mentioned that Iran had about 2,000 ballistic missiles and about 100 to 120 launchers, which is the bottleneck. And they know that every time a launcher launches a missile, it risks being shot at and eliminated. This is what the Israeli Air Force is doing, the U.S. Air Force is doing. So I think that there is a possibility that they don't have that much. Also, this time, it's not just about Israel, but they're shooting at the entire region. Some of them are the same missiles, some are not, but I think that's another issue. And we got to keep in mind that their command and control was severely hit. We don't know how capable they are in carrying out the orders, planning a cohesive plan, or more of local forces just shooting whenever they can. So, even the timing in previous round, it was like on the hour or on the half hour, and now just sporadic throughout the day. It's also an indication of weakness, not of strength, if I need to estimate.
Avner, I think here in the West, we are all absolutely amazed at the accuracy, not just of your timing, but also of the strike that you made on the Ayatollah, on his headquarters, taking out not just him, members of his family, but also leaders of the regime. How extensive is the Israeli network within Iran?
So Iran has been an adversary of Israel for the last 3 decades. This regime openly states that its first mission is to annihilate Israel. And we took this seriously. For over 3 decades, we've built an array of capabilities in intelligence, in offensive measures to deal with this threat. We take them at face value. And what you've seen also in June and yesterday is the actions based on 30 years of intelligence following what's going on there. And they have been able to hit us in the past. It's not It's not a one-sided conflict. I'm glad that right now we are showing our strength with minimal casualties, but I wouldn't conclude until it's over.
Okay, I mean, we've heard President Trump say that he feels this is the moment when the population can actually take control, when they can, what is it he said, rise up and force the regime change, take over your government, it will be yours to take. Is there any sort of support at all that Israel is prepared to give the population of Iran on the ground? Because we all know that the air strength will not be sufficient. You will need some sort of support on the ground for a population, a civilian population, which is unarmed and has been incredibly brave in the past several weeks and months in rising up against the regime. But they have always been suppressed, of course, by the Revolutionary Guard, and they are likely to be so again. So is there any support at all, practical support on the ground, that Israel would be able to give the civilian population of Iran?
Yeah, so I think that it would be hard to provide substantial support either by Israel or the U.S. or anybody who doesn't want to put their own boots on the ground in substantial forces. I think that the most support that Israel and the U.S. can give, they're already given, and they may be able to continue giving. I think that we were very close to a challenge on the regime in early January or mid-January. And I think that now, if the people of Iran would go out to the streets again, the police officer in the street will need to make a decision. Do they shoot their own countrymen or not? Is now not only facing an unarmed group of protesters, but they're also facing the force of the United States and Israel. They've seen what happened to their leadership. They see where this is going, and I think that they will ask themselves, do I want to continue and shoot my fellow brothers? And these are their brothers, and they know it. So I think that when this will be challenged, and I think it will be challenged in the next few days, maybe weeks. I don't know what the outcome will be, but it may be different than what we've seen in January. There could be some tactical help there, but I don't think it's a game changer. It's going to be a spice, but not the main course. The main work will need to be done by the Iranian people themselves.
Avner, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Tel Aviv. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
And back in the studio, GB News reporter Will Godley is here again. What is the latest, Will?
Well, Angela, we've in the last few minutes seen some very incredible pictures of the Skylight oil tanker. This is an oil tanker that's in the Iranian shadow fleet. It was designated by the United States in December last year. And this is footage now on your screens of that oil tanker on fire. The Oman Maritime Security Centre said earlier this morning that their crew of 20 was evacuated from the vessel. 4 people needed medical attention after the vessel was struck and caught on fire. The crew of 20, there is 15 Indian crew and 5 Iranian crew who were evacuated from the Skylight oil tanker, part of the Iranian shadow fleet, as this vessel continues to be on fire in the Gulf. Not the only vessel we know that's been struck, as the UK Maritime Office has said that they have received reports of 2 incidences in the last few hours in the Gulf. So that's vessels that they are looking at there. But let's also go to Dubai as well, because Dubai, of course, is somewhere we know that has been struck by Iranian missiles, and the missiles have been targeting civilian infrastructure, hotels and airports. And we're hearing now reports from inside the government in the UK that they are facing mounting concerns because of the fact there will now be in Dubai hundreds of thousands of Brits who will potentially be stranded, not only in Dubai, but around the world. It's obviously a huge aviation hub, but particularly Brits stranded in the Gulf, in the Middle East, and how they will evacuate them is something we understand the government will be thinking about over the next few hours, and potentially something they'll have to put into action over today and into tomorrow.
Thanks very much indeed, Will. And in fact, we hope to be talking to somebody who is in Dubai at the moment who may be able to answer some of those questions. But we were just talking there to our guest in Tel Aviv, Avner Vilan, and one of the points that he made was that he felt that perhaps there was a turning point in Iran, that if members of the public did rise up again, that the police on the street would stop and think, are they going to shoot their brothers? You have the look of someone who thinks that is possibly not going to be a question that will be in the minds of most policemen in Iran. But do you see that as happening? Do you see a sort of popular turning?
I don't. I go back to what Robert said earlier. In a country of 91 million plus, the scale of what's required, I think we can only speculate here from the UK, but the scale of that for a civilian-led regime change is so enormous. And you look at the thousands and thousands of people that have been murdered since the turn of the year. Okay, so I think that the likely most immediate outcome is going to be some form of decision or pivot from new leadership at the top. And meanwhile, our own government has an increasing priority. I mean, I was really pleased to hear, Angela, somebody there from the IDF saying how well British military had worked with them over recent days. But we've got now our bases in Cyprus, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Bahrain, and we've got a large number of British citizens who I can see immediately going to need help to be evacuated out of there. And that's going to be the most pressing area where we can make an impact.
Laura.
It is almost maddening to watch the rhetoric we've seen in the last 24 hours, which is, well, we've taken out the Ayatollah. It's up to you, the unarmed people of Iran who've been protesting for a year, who have been killed with lethal force over and over again, to overthrow this extremely long-lasting regime. It is not going to happen, and people will die in the process. We need now boots on the ground action, not air cover, because air cover kills people and doesn't enforce order in Iran. Let us look.
That's realistic.
I don't know what Trump's plan is right now. I think it is very unrealistic because if Trump will be looking at the midterms, and in terms of the midterms, this is a very popular move because it makes headlines and it seems to solve a problem, and boots on the ground and risking American soldiers' lives is not popular. But it needs to happen. Look at the last time that Iran was in a sort of revolutionary crisis point post-assassination. We got Ayatollah Khomeini, and we got the Ayatollah supported by secular and sort of Western protesters in a sort of state of flux and chaos. That could happen again. In the meantime, we could lose a fifth of the world's oil supply. The markets in the oil markets open tonight, and it is very likely we will see a price surge. That's what happens when you wade in and don't have a plan.
Jack, what is likely to happen in America? I mean, he's not got full support from the American... He hasn't got the full support of Congress. He hasn't got the full support of the American people. Is he going to have to back off and effectively admit that having started this incursion, he's not going to then support the very people that he says he wants to help? That once again, having said, rise up, we're there to support you, and he disappears into the sunset.
Yeah, well, firstly, on the domestic side, there's a sort of strange situation, really, where Congress, I think, is actually going to vote on this action next week. Which is
next week?
They've, of course, been completely sidelined. Constitutionally, of course, they do have a say, important say in military action and war. Based on what the guest, though, was saying, previous guest, excuse me, it kind of sounded to me like they were hoping for something similar to what happened in Egypt in 2011, where the security forces and military wouldn't shoot at their people.
Yes.
That's a pretty big gamble, to put it mildly. And then, you know, I'm not. Of course, the situations are very different, but you do wonder if it's going to be something like that, which is said is a massive gamble, or if it's going to be something perhaps more like what happened in Syria in 2012 with a brutal crackdown. In that case, with the use of chemical weapons multiple times and a protracted conflict that lasted far longer. So it's an sort of extraordinary gamble, and I agree. It's sort of a lack of objectives, really, or clear objectives from Trump. I heard someone call this kind of the anti-power doctrine. No international consensus and no clear strategy of why they're there, and probably most importantly, no clear strategy of actually how to necessarily get out.
Hasn't that been the problem, that there has been no exit strategy? It's been gung-ho, let's go for it, let's bomb the hell out of them, and actually what happens next?
But are we surprised? And I've got to be careful because I'm due to go to America quite soon in what I say. But it's he's known for that sort of quite bombastic short-term planning. The reality is the Islamic Republic of Iran remains the principal source of instability and terror in the Middle East, okay, and that's ultimately the thing that is of most relevance to us in this country. The leadership's been taken out, that's a good thing, but we all agree there is no plan for what next and how. The objectives are to get agreements from whatever leadership emerges on the nuclear question and the threat towards the existence of Israel. That's the start of it. But none of us can be clear on where that or how that might emerge. But what I do agree on is, I just can't see any ground forces coming from anywhere, and it just, it may be the thing that would be needed in theory to do right by the people there. But does anyone here think that's going to happen? No.
Lara, do you think that this is a betrayal of the people of Iran?
Let's make it clear, a very, very evil man who led an evil regime for almost half a decade is dead. That is probably a good thing. But I think the failure to follow through from a political move, that it was very popular, to a very difficult and unpopular move is very, very disappointing for me. I am starting to wonder if the situation in terms of oil is going to change things. You would know, but I don't think the Straits of Hormuz has ever been shut before. I know that, and I think if we lose 1/5 of the world's oil supply, all of the oil going from the Persian Gulf coming into the West, we may suddenly see a turn in the appetite for boots on the ground and sort of peaceful enforcement in Iran.
Well, that's something we can perhaps debate further with my guests, but I think that this is the point where we're going to say thank you to both of you for joining us this morning. But it's been fascinating listening to all of the things that you think are likely to happen in the future. But I think, as always, when something like this happens, because we are all in the dark, all that we can do is make assumptions and hope that some of them will turn out to be for real. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, I'm staying with Jack and with Robert Fox, and I'm also going to be talking to Jeff Blackett, who's a former Judge Advocate General, who is joining us now. There he is, yes.
Hello, Angela.
Good morning to you. You've been listening to our discussions this morning, I'm sure. Let me begin by asking you the main question of the day. What next? Where do we go from here? There doesn't appear to be an exit strategy. There appears to be a demand by Trump for the people of Iran to rise up and take control of their country and reaffirm democracy, but very little hope of any sort of outside support to enable them to achieve that.
Well, what next in terms of the UK is that we've got to support the American and Israeli operation, without a doubt, in my view. But in terms of what's going to happen in weeks and months to come, well, I haven't got a glass ball at the moment, and I can't really say.
But when you say support, do you mean just support verbally? Do you mean support tactically, strategically? What kind of support are you suggesting that we give them?
Well, certainly verbally and politically, but also I think we should be using our bases to allow the Americans to operate, particularly from Diego Garcia and, if necessary, from Cyprus. I also heard one of your commentators earlier talk about sending the Royal Navy out into the Gulf to provide defensive forces. That would be something that I would support as well.
Are you convinced that we can get away with the accusations being made that it is not a lawful thing that Trump has done, that there is no legality in this whatsoever?
And that's what I thought you were going to ask me in the first place, which is what I thought I was here for.
Well, I'm asking you now.
Well, it's interesting because I've listened to Emily Thornberry and others talk about the illegality of the action. And they base that, I think, on the United Nations Charter, which says you can only use armed force either in self-defence under Article 51 or under a Chapter 7 resolution. but actually the law is much more nuanced and complicated than that. And I would say there are three reasons why the action is lawful. I mean, the first one is that actually Israel and the US have been at war with Iran since 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini proclaimed that death to America and death to Israel. And if you listen to President Trump, he listed a number of incidents over the years where Iran has used force against the United States, starting with the violent takeover of the US Embassy in 1979. And so I'm sure he would say that this is just ongoing. There doesn't need to be separate justification for this act because it's an ongoing part of a long war. That's got some merit, but I think the other two reasons why it's lawful is, first of all, under the doctrine of humanitarian intervention. That's been developed in customary international law, not least by Tony Blair in 1999 when he made a speech about the doctrine of international community and said that the use of armed force is an imperfect instrument, but sometimes it's the only way to overthrow a dictator. And it would be callous for the international community to stand by and hide behind the United Nations Charter and watch the degradation, torture and slaughter of civilians in Iran. So that's the second reason. And the third reason, of course, is self-defense. That's been mentioned this morning as well. President Trump said that his objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime. And obviously Israel have been acting under self-defense in Gaza. Iran sponsors terrorism. And so I think it's a very strong argument that they're acting in self-defense.
Indeed, I think your quote is that the action is morally justified, but arguably lawful.
Yes, I think, and that's the dilemma of the modern world. The United Nations Charter was established after the Second World War and deals with interstate activity. And it's no longer really fit for purpose. It needs to change, as we've seen in a lot of conflicts. But when there's the moral imperative, I think it's right that we should find a legal justification to support that moral imperative.
Are you worried at all that we were talking earlier about the way in which Russia could now say, well, you know, we've invaded Ukraine and China could similarly want to invade? I mean, are we actually opening the door to other countries who are able to use that argument and say that there is a perfectly valid reason why we are taking the action that we are?
Yes, of course, there's always that problem, but they're going to do it anyway. Those regimes have never acted within the law in any event, and I think they hide behind the law to criticise the West. I think we've got to stand up as a Western democracy for our moral compass.
Are we likely to do that, though? Because, as we were also discussing earlier, Sir Keir Starmer at the moment seems to be very happy sitting on the fence.
Yes. Well, not unusual for this government, unfortunately. But I think that he's going to be forced to do something as the conflict continues, and I don't think it'll be possible to sit on the fence. There's also the problem that Iran are firing missiles all over the place, and there will likely to be British casualties. I see earlier in the day that John Healey said 2 missiles have been fired towards Cyprus. So I think that if this continues, we will be dragged in any event.
You say dragged, therefore unwillingly.
Well, certainly unwillingly by our government, but possibly more willingly by those of us who think we should be taking part.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeff, for joining us. And I did get round to asking you the question that you were expecting.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you so much. Now, we are seeing pictures live from Beit Shemesh, which is a city in Israel, showing the aftermath of an attack, an Iranian rocket attack. Israeli security and rescue teams are also currently at the scene where a residential home was struck. So let's cross now to Will Godney for the latest. What's happening, Will?
Well, as we look at these pictures from Israel, we've also, in the last few minutes, had an update from the IDF. Of course, they told us earlier that their operation, as they're calling it, had two operations, and the first, of course, was to eliminate 40 key figures in Iran. We know they killed the supreme leader and wiped out 40 others. And the second half of their operation was to destroy key sites for air missiles and launching these missiles from Iran. Well, we've had an update about what the destruction there has looked like, and I can tell you that the IDF is saying hundreds of Iranian terror regime missiles were destroyed and the production of at least 1,500 additional ballistic missiles were prevented from these strikes. They also said approximately 200 ballistic missile launchers were dismantled and dozens more rendered inoperable. And that's significant for the Israelis because they were telling me earlier that is the bottleneck in Iran's operations. They have, at the start of this operation, 2,500 missiles, but far fewer launchers. So by destroying the launchers and destroying and dismantling them, that prevents them from firing back further ballistic missiles into Israel. And so the IDF now in the last few minutes saying 50% of the regime's ballistic missile launchers have now been destroyed. And also the IDF saying Iran's central explosives production site was dismantled as well. And that's a site which produces the explosive warheads in these ballistic missiles and other rockets that they are firing. So the IDF with these figures showing just the scale of their disruption and destruction in Iran, and no doubt the impact that that will now have on further retaliation efforts from Iran as they look to send further rockets back to Iran. But no doubt, as launchers destroyed and further rocket facilities destroyed, they'll have a real difficulty doing that.
Thanks very much indeed, Will. Well, I'm joined now by CEO of Miriam Institute and the host of Opinionated at 124 News, and that's Benjamin Anthony, who's joining us now. Benjamin, we've been hearing this morning about what is happening in Tel Aviv, the way that you are reacting to all of the hits that you're receiving from Iran. Can I ask you, what is your strategy? What is your end game here? What do you see happening at the end of this present conflict where you are lobbing missiles at each other? Where does this end for the people who live in Iran, for the people who are desperate for democracy?
Hi, Angela. It's a pleasure to be with you and thank you for having me. I think that Israel's been very, very clear over a number of years. I don't think there's anything new that's eventuated from our recent conflict with Iran in terms of what our strategy is. We want to ensure that Iran, this regime, never obtains a nuclear weapon. In addition to that, we want to ensure that the threat of the ballistic missile buildup that holds us very firmly within range does not come to reality and is massively downgraded. We're in the midst of doing that work very dutifully, as the previous commentator just expressed. And the third issue is that we need to rid ourselves of this scourge of the Iranian terror proxy network that is right on our borders, including in southern Lebanon, known as Hezbollah, including inside the Gaza Strip, known as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and is arrayed, frankly, all over the world and elsewhere, and will soon pose, and already does in many cases, a very clear and present threat to Western civilization as we know it. So I think everybody knows, if they've been listening to the Prime Minister, what the Prime Minister wants. I think that he's right to pursue those goals. And I applaud, of course, the pilots and the military of the Israel Defense Forces for moving forward and advancing those in the best and most effective way possible. And I'm thankful and grateful for the partnership and the alliance with the United States of America, something that stands in very stark contrast with the foolishness and ineptitude, if I may say so, of the non-Prime Minister that you have there in the UK, the country of my birth and upbringing, Keir Starmer. The man's statement was appalling, it was dreadful, and I think he continues, unfortunately, to beclown himself with statements where he rushes to say that the UK has no involvement. The man actually makes Neville Chamberlain look positively Churchillian, in my opinion. And it's lamentable that there's such a non-leader in position at such a consequential time as this.
What do you want him to say? What do you want him to do then?
Well, I think I'd like him to to grow up a little bit, and I'll explain why. This is a man who sees a phantom state that doesn't exist, the state of Palestine, and recognizes it at the United Nations. This is a man who sees intelligence about the proximity to the man he made ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, to Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender, and sends him there nonetheless. The state of Palestine that Keir Starmer recognized was about as true and real as Never Neverland, and Keir Starmer is really about as grown up as Peter Pan, the child who vowed to never grow up. So I think I'd like him to see the reality of the fact that when he says, and I'm quoting here, that the Iranian regime poses a direct threat to dissidents and to the Jewish community inside the United Kingdom, he ought to actually do something about that, rather than to then go on and say it poses that threat. We've interdicted many terror threats against our own people in our own British shores, but we're not actually going to do anything about it. That's non-leadership, if ever it were to be defined and looked upon.
Well, you've made that very clear indeed. Let me just ask you this. Going back to the beginning of your answer just now, you were saying the two main things that you want out of this present conflict. First of all is to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear weapon. And I think you're quite right that the air defences that you have, the air strike, the air power that you have would be able to take out those locations. But when you talk about getting rid of this terrorist proxy country, that is going to have to come from regime change. What powers, what support do you have to give to the population, to the 91 million people who live in Iran, to enable that to happen? Because there you are talking about regime change. And unless you're prepared to put boots on the ground, clearly that is not going to happen, because if it does not happen, it means you are going to have to go on negotiating with a hard-line Iranian leadership.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Again, it was three goals. It's the end to the nuclear weapons pursuit of Iran, the end to the ballistic missile threats that Iran is propping up, and of course the end to the terror network that's arrayed throughout the globe and right here along the borders of Israel in at least two cases. So in terms of regime change, look, we have to take a brief glance back in order to understand where we are and why that's become the goal. We had a 12-day war. The 12-day war was brought about in order to bring down the ballistic missile capabilities of Iran. We did that successfully, but they're replenishing it because the regime endured, and also to dramatically degrade the nuclear weapons program, which we did, but they are replenishing that and rejuvenating it because the regime endured. Now, in addition to that, Angela, one of the things that we've managed to do is to massively downgrade the effectiveness of the proxies that Iran has on our borders. Therefore, we have a freer hand to act against the regime because they have less deterrence against us as a result of the enfeebling of their proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza by the Israel Defense Forces. And in addition to that, we've got superiority over the skies of Iran as a consequence of the 12-day war that was undertaken previously by Israel together with the United States of America. Now, when you put all of that together and you realize that no matter how impeded the Iranians are, and you realize no matter how enfeebled their proxies are, they are still going to pursue nuclear weapons, you have to turn your sights towards a different goal, and that goal is regime change. Now, Khamenei has been dispatched. I'm very pleased that he's been dispatched. The dispatching of leaders in ideological jihadist regimes seems merely to spawn the next leader. That's not to decry the importance of doing so. It's a blessed and it's a valuable pursuit that we are undertaking there. But ultimately, Angela, I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump have united behind a very clear line, and that is, we will open the area for you, people of Iran, but you are going to have to stand up and take your country in hand. That's ultimately where this should go. We haven't yet seen the people emerge. It's likely that that's a consequence of the ongoing pounding and bombardment that the Iranian regime is currently absorbing. But I'm hopeful that in time, the people may well rise up and fashion that country into a more preferable form to the one that it's had since the revolution.
Benjamin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm going to, before I go to my next guest, I just want a very quick response to what Benjamin has just said from my two studio guests. Robert.
Extremely articulate. It is the point. I rather expected Benjamin to make the point that there is a difference between Netanyahu and Trump in this. Netanyahu has wanted a war with Iran from his rise to power, and it's not out of self-interest. It's out of self-defense. Whether you agree with him or not, it's a fundamental that this had to be done against this regime. And Israel is doing it because it is for the defense and survival of the Jewish state. And that is a given, and you have to understand the fundamental. And that is where the second point is that you've got to see the means that they're bringing to it. They're bringing the means that they are very good at. They know they can't put boots on the ground, but the Israeli intelligence operation, not only by Mossad, but by military unit 8200, they got the mobile phone network. That's how they knew where Khamenei was, where people are. And it is actually, they're the top of the game. There is nothing to match them in the world for that. And that's what they will go on doing.
I'll come back to you later because I have to join us now from Dubai is travel counsellor Claire Jackson. She is in Dubai. Claire, you were there on holiday, but you actually know that you and your company have lots of people in that part of the world now on holiday. And we've been receiving some quite disturbing reports about the thousands of people that are stuck at the airport. What sort of provision are you making for getting people out? Because you are now going to be stuck there for several days, aren't you?
Yes, we're not sure. Our flight's just been cancelled, so at the moment we don't know when we're going. I mean, all I can say is that travel counsellors, for all of our clients, you know, we've got a duty office back home in the UK. We've also got a crisis team that was set up yesterday. They've worked all through the night tirelessly to pinpoint where all our clients are in Dubai and surrounding areas. All of those clients have been contacted. They have been reassured that we're going to do everything we can to get them out. So, I mean, it's in situations like this that, you know, you're very grateful you've booked with a travel agent, someone you can talk to who can give you reassurance and answer all those questions, because those people that have just booked independently, you know, you're at the wrath of the airlines and or the travel operator that you potentially can't get through to. So having a personal, you know, human being you can talk to is very helpful.
Well, at least some people then are perhaps going to get some sort of support. How about you? I mean, I know you're there to support your, as a sort of early celebration of your birthday, which is coming up in a couple of days' time.
I'm out here with two girlfriends. We've known each other since school, and we came out here to celebrate our 50th birthdays. So my birthday's actually on Thursday, so it looks like I might be having that out here. And yes, we were out having a great time. We were actually on the flight, fastened our seatbelts, and we're about to take off when suddenly the pilot said, "I'm very sorry, we're not going anywhere. They've closed the airspace." So we sat on the plane for about 4 hours. I mean, the BA, we were flying with BA. All the staff, the crew were brilliant. They gave us refreshments. They tried to help with the aircon that was working, wasn't working, etc. And eventually let us off. But we were, because they'd grounded all the flights, that every flight was being diverted to Dubai, it was quite hard to then get into the airport because there were so many of us to get through immigration. We jumped on the internet straight away and booked a hotel because we didn't know how long it was going to take for BA to find us one. So we got a hotel last night. It was near the airport. It was quite an experience, shall I say. We woke up at 2 a.m. this morning by, I don't know if you'll remember, there was a message alert that went out from the government to everybody in the UK last year, a very high-pitched, shrill sound. We got that at 2 a.m. this morning. I didn't know what the hell it was. It was all in Arabic. And then we had an English message as well. It basically just said, missiles are firing, stay inside, don't go outside.
Do you feel safe?
We swiftly moved hotels this morning.
Do you feel safe, all of you?
We do now. We've moved hotels, so we feel much safer now. Where we were before, it wasn't there weren't many Westerners there. We were near the airport, and we just didn't feel very safe. So we've moved a bit further inland now, and we're down in a bit more of a touristy area. We feel like, we do feel a bit safer here. But I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
What is the atmosphere among the people that you're seeing? Other people who are there on holiday, people that you know that live there? What generally is the atmosphere and the feeling like among all of you at the moment?
I mean, to be honest, this hotel's actually not that busy. It's quite quiet. You know, half term, thank God this didn't happen in half term 2 weeks ago. I can imagine it would have been a completely different experience with all children and stuff, but it's a lot quieter now. It was Ramadan as well, so that it's also a bit quieter because of that. But generally, I mean, you speak to people and we're all in the same boat. We're all just constantly on the news, seeing what the next update is. Well, our flight got cancelled this afternoon and we're just sitting here like ducks, basically, just waiting for a bit of an update.
Well, I'm sure that we'll get as much information to you as we possibly can, Claire. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Stay safe and travel safely eventually. And happy birthday when it comes up. Right, Will is with us back in the studio again. So what's the latest that you have for us, Will?
Well, let's cross now to the UAE because their Ministry of Defence have just put out a statement as they have collated all the details and the strikes that they have dealt with over the last 24 hours. They have said that the UAE air defences have dealt with 165 ballistic missiles fired from Iran, 2 cruise missiles and 541 Iranian drones so far. And as a result of those strikes, many of which were shot down by the UAE air defences, 3 people have been killed in the UAE and 58 people have been wounded by these attacks from Iran on the UAE. They listed the nationalities of those injured. I can tell you that no British people in the UAE have so far been injured or killed, according to the UAE Ministry of Defence. And we can also go back to these live pictures behind me of Beit Shemesh. That is just about 30 kilometres away from Jerusalem in Israel, where an Iranian missile struck this morning. The Jerusalem Post is saying 4 people have died as a result of that, and a 10-year-old girl is seriously injured. The ambulance service in Israel is saying that 17 people have been taken to hospital as a result of their injuries. 2 people are in a serious condition. 1 person is in a moderate condition as well. And as you can see from these pictures, live pictures behind me, emergency services, Angela, remain on the scene.
Thank you very much indeed, Will. Well, I still have with me here in the studio Dr. Jack Clayton and Robert Fox. We've covered so many aspects of this during the last 2 hours. Just to sum up now, are we seeing the beginning of the end, or is it an end that's all going to end in tears? Jack?
We probably are seeing the beginning of some kind of end, but although we began with the question of what happens next, and I think actually with one of the previous guests, what I'm quite concerned about, which has been reoccurring, is that people have been saying it's up to the Iranians what to do. And they're going to need support in some kind of way. When you have a totalitarian regime in the form of the Islamic Republic that has so entrenched the way that the regime runs, people, the popularising people are not going to be able to just walk into government. I'm not saying that they can't govern or that they're incapable, but they will need international support in some kind of way. And it's just not going to cut the mustard, really, to say that, you know, it's up to you guys what to do next.
No. Robert, as you've pointed out on a couple of occasions over the last 2 hours, we are talking about 91 million people who have different political and religious backgrounds. This is not a united country even to start with. What are the chances that they will come together as a united group to overthrow this, 47-year-old dictatorship and actually get closer to some kind of democracy?
Very difficult, and I think you may see a new form of community politics emerging from this. The alliance isn't very united either, as we've said about the Iranian people. And I think, very much your world, we're stepping through a new conception of war. It's on-off war. War was an instrument of ultimate resort. It was the last thing you would go to, and you wanted to do it if you really believed it could change things inexorably in your favour. Well, it's now an ongoing process. We're stepping through to the new world here and in Ukraine in particular, and in Sudan and Gaza to some extent.
Yes, there are other places in the world where this is already happening.
And it's the gamification of war. It is war almost in a video dimension, because this is what we're getting, what we will see more and more of the fighting and defense going on in Iran, but all the things that I've mentioned, all of the above, where AI, autonomous weapons, killer robots, yes, awful cliche, those sort of things are going to play a bigger part. But I think that what the real chance is the resilience. They have an intelligentsia, highly educated people, but I think that they've got to emerge as communities, because the overarching carapace of the religious dictatorship that you had was very, very, very unpopular in Iran.
But very strong.
Absolutely.
Yes.
No, we're going round in circles.
Yes.
I know. You're absolutely right there. Because you could call in the guns you had the toughs and the rich thugs of the right clans in the IRGC. That's how the Khamenei clan did it.
And they become they become fanatical as much as anything, don't they, in their support of the regime, in the same way that there are those who are sufficiently fanatical to want to get rid of it. And I think there's been a lot of talk about Reza Pahlavi, who was the Shah's son taking over. But in fact, I heard interviews earlier this morning from the Iranian government in X-Files saying that he's the last person that they want. So very briefly, last word, Jack. Is the problem going to be finding someone who will lead this country into a new era?
It absolutely will, but also to kind of add to that point about the use of military action, we're actually sort of seeing, I think, now unravel might is right, where it's just not to an end to go to use military action, but it's actually going to be almost a political instrument in itself to try and bring that different kind of change happening. Right now, of course, as we just said, it's actually not clear who that would be in the case of Iran.
Yeah. I just hope that Donald Trump doesn't just walk away from it because he gets bored, because he hasn't got an end product.
Hasn't finished anything.
Hasn't finished anything. Thank you both very much indeed. Indeed, thanks to all of you who have joined us today. And there's plenty more to come throughout the day, but coming up next on GB News, it's Dawn Deasem.
Thank you very much, Angela. You're watching GB News with me, Dawn Neeson. It is 1 o'clock on the 1st of March. Breaking news for you. President Trump has confirmed the death of the Iranian Supreme Leader.